He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
This is Mediawatch. I'm Colin Peacock. Politicians are getting much more multimedia with their own messages for the press. These days, MPs are even handing MP3s of themselves out to the media. We ask why, and does it work? But before all that, lobbying campaigns targeting the politicians via the media are getting more intense.
Now, Auckland risks being cast into obscurity as a global city. That's according to a just-released report. The State of Auckland report paints a pretty bleak picture. It says the city has been hit by a double whammy of slow pandemic recovery and economic downturn.
That was Ingrid Hipkiss on Morning Report on Tuesday, kicking the day off with more bad news for the big smoke. Any other problems?
It also says Auckland is hamstrung economically. Its reputation as safe and vibrant, that is starting to fade, and it needs to attract major investment.
And there were more problems in the third annual State of the City report released by the Committee for Auckland. And that umbrella group wasn't the only one raising that problem of safety in the city this past week, as we'll hear later. In essence, the report found that Auckland was falling behind the other comparable world cities, and the Committee for Auckland's director, Mark Thomas, went on to tell Morning Report,
"We don't have what we're calling an organising story about Auckland. Auckland's been losing profile internationally, and we need a much stronger effort in that area."
But lack of an organising story about Auckland was a bit of an irony, because the Committee for Auckland had organised a pretty good story there for the media on Tuesday. But the main message was that Auckland was now at a turning point, according to the report. But in a good way, according to the Minister for Auckland, Simeon Brown, who told News Talk ZB, Auckland is turning a corner.
And I think that's where, the International Convention Centre is, I think, going to be a significant game changer.
No, Simeon, that's not the kind of
Auckland.
event anyone wants to go to. No one wants to go to a convention.
Well, it's very important in terms of
No, I'm talking about cool things like
people
Metallica.
and investment into the city.
Metallica's coming up in November. We've got Sail GP early next year. What else have we got?
But last Tuesday, it wasn't really the shortage of Metallica calibre big gigs in Auckland coming up, but a shortage of hospital space right now. RNZ that same morning had reported some patients arriving at Auckland City and Middlemore hospitals on Monday couldn't be admitted or had to be diverted to non-hospital clinics. And Simeon Brown is also the Minister of Health.
That alarms me that we're sending AMBOs away to private clinics. Does it you?
Well, the reality is if someone is of a lower acuity, patients will be managed. But the key thing here is if people need care, they will get it.
No, that's cool, but I just wonder if we're running it just a little bit close to the bone and if we need to sort of think about expanding the resource here.
And back on RNZ's Morning Report on Tuesday, that was the story backing up the one about the State of the City report.
Let's start with the situation yesterday, some ramping where, ambulances are sort of backed up. Talk us through what happened.
Oh, look, we started on a very busy note yesterday morning across the Auckland hospitals, but we worked closely with St John's.
So, a bit like those arrivals at Auckland Hospital EDs, the bad news for Auckland was backing up in the media. Now, soon after that, the Prime Minister pointed the finger elsewhere to explain the depth of Auckland's problems.
Basically, I think that's the hangover of a Labour government that didn't care about Auckland, focused on Wellington, shut the joint down for 2 years.
But while the Prime Minister blamed Wellington, the capital's daily The Post was riffing on the report's findings under the stark headline, "The State of Auckland, its productivity problem is holding New Zealand back." Now, strangely, the Auckland-based New Zealand Herald itself carried nothing about the State of the City report on its pages this week, perhaps because of its recent declaration that it would be boosting stories of economic success under the tagline, "On the Up." But the Herald apart, the Committee for Auckland comms team would have been delighted with the volume of media coverage they got for their report this week, and that's not easy for a dense report where the news is not all that great. Now, another part of the coverage was Viv Beck of the Auckland business lobby group Heart of the City, who told the Herald Now show that Auckland's improvements just needed to speed up.
What it means to us is actually getting on with the job. We've got the things being built, we've got to make them happen faster, and we've got to get more people.
But one thing Viv Beck didn't mention in the Herald Now studio last Tuesday was that her group had just called on the government to act urgently on another matter on behalf of Auckland, social issues in our city. Heart of the City and others paid for a full-page ad in last weekend's Herald, which highlighted a previous Herald series on crime in Auckland, and then demanded a coordinated solution from government and the police. And it directly addressed this to Christopher Luxon like this.
Dear Prime Minister, The rise in crime and antisocial behaviour since COVID-19 struck is stark and confronting. We ask that you please take urgent action to support recovery and retain our reputation as a safe city and country. An increase in crime and antisocial behaviour is the last thing Auckland needs.
Now, the following day, the Prime Minister was again upbraided in writing and in public. In the Sunday papers, there was another open letter from another umbrella group that was calling on him to fix a broken energy sector. And this campaign did get the attention of the Herald, which put it on the front page on Monday. And the day the ad appeared in print on Sunday, it was on TVNZ's Q&A show as well, like this.
A group of industry bodies and independent energy retailers have this morning launched a nationwide campaign calling for an overhaul of New Zealand's energy market.
Now, in response, the government's Minister for Energy, the aptly named Simon Watts, acknowledged to the Herald our electricity market is not functioning as well as it should. And it's not the first time that he's been singled out by a campaign on this.
Isn't that a cabinet minister up there in a superhero suit?
His name is Megawatts. And with his powers combined, he could save the country $11 billion.
A campaign's been built around a character called Megawatts, aka the Energy and Climate Change Minister Simon Watts.
That was TVNZ's Fiona Owen on the Q&A show back in June, talking about a billboard ad campaign directed at Simon Watts by a pro-electrification group called Rewiring NZ. And they were urging Simon Watts to make this an issue at the next election and urging the public to write to him to ram that message home. And to make sure that he didn't miss it, the campaign used one particular billboard spot near the Beehive. And it wasn't the first time that lobby groups like Federated Farmers and the Sensible Sentencing Trust have done exactly the same thing, as Fiona Owen reported.
Former National Party staffer Annie O'Brien from the campaign company put the ad together.
A couple of our campaigns recently have been placed on the Lumo site on Whitmore Street, and that is visible from ministerial offices, and so that has been a very conscious part of our strategy.
Now, all that made Fiona Owen wonder just how the ministers targeted by these ads react to them.
Do you notice this?
Yes, I do, yes, because on the way to the airport, you know, people come out of Parliament and swing around down onto the quays there, so it's pretty hard to miss, to be honest. No, it's clever.
Clever, said Chris Bishop, but are those campaigns really effective? We'll come back to that. Politicians themselves are, of course, not exactly shy about pushing messages themselves to the public when it suits them, and that's why journalists' email inboxes are still flooded with media statements these days from ministers and from MPs, hoping that their comments on issues will make it into the media's coverage. But lately, they've been getting a lot more multimedia. Last weekend, for example, reporters got a statement from the Minister of Foreign Affairs about Mr. Peters at the East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting in Malaysia. And along with a couple of photos, there was a 20-second video of the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio seeking out Mr. Peters for what looked like a very warm handshake and a friendly chat. New Zealand First posted that on their Facebook feed on the day of the meeting, and then again on Tuesday to a bit of a soundtrack.
Announcing the arrival of His Excellency Winston Raymond Peters, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of New Zealand.
And the same day, last Tuesday, the Herald Now streaming show also made use of that footage of Marco Rubio and his encounter with Mr. Peters.
I saw the video which I think we're going to play, where he sort of comes over to you, you're sitting there. What did you guys chat about?
Well, I actually had a time to say to him, look, there are things happening in our neighbourhood where your review of aid and other programs is going to be very, very expensive for us.
Mr. Peters then getting good mileage out of that footage. Now, the previous week, Mediawatch noticed that another minister was going the extra mile in their handouts for the media.
We're continuing to deliver on our promise of cutting through unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape. We're making changes that will make life easier for hard-working Kiwi families managing property through family trusts.
That was Nicole McKe, Associate Minister of Justice, talking there about anti-money laundering law changes to make managing property easier through family trusts. And alongside the standard media statement issued by her office was that MP3 audio clip of her reading out some of the key lines. But it wasn't the first time the minister has handed out audio like this. Back in June, there were 3 separate soundbites about the 3 strikes law coming into force, including this.
The public demanded that they have this law back, and we've delivered for them. Victims deserve a justice system that backs them, not their attackers.
So why is Nicole McKe's office grabbing their own selected soundbites of the minister rather than waiting for the reporters to record their own ones in a media conference, which is the usual way? I asked the Associate Minister of Justice this week.
We thought it would be an innovative way of not only getting a press release out, but getting some of those key quick points to media as well. I mean, we found that quite often we'll put out a media release, then we get all the phone calls looking for a grab. We thought, well, why not give a grab? I believe it has been picked up by a couple of radio stations, but I haven't actually tracked it myself. So if this helps some of our media, and it appears to because it has been used, then we're going to continue to do it.
Yeah, I mean, RNZ's gallery folks say they wouldn't use audio supplied under those circumstances. If they could attend a media conference or get that comment directly, that's how they prefer to do it. But is it possible you might be supplying these comments as a substitute for interviews or media conferences? I know, call me cynical, but you do have a party leader who's spoken about wanting to bypass the media, and possibly at times the media can't be trusted, and maybe this is a way your ministers could get their messages out as they desired in the media?
No, not at all. That's not the reason for doing it. It's actually realising that our media are quite stretched for time and for people. It's trying to help them out, especially when they have deadlines. I've always made myself available, still have. For the last couple of weeks, for example, I've held several press conferences and stand-ups and am always available to the media should they want a sound grab directly. I'm happy to give it. But we just thought that this would help the media. We thought we'd give it a go, especially if they do have those tight deadlines, and, of course, some have less staff now.
Yeah, so RNZ's gallery did mention that on that issue of the family trusts and changing the anti-money laundering laws, that yes, they did ask for and were granted an interview as they would normally expect to. But it could happen, couldn't it? You make some comment, then the media start ringing up and you really don't feel like talking to them or being quizzed any further about it. You would say, look, there is comment there, just use that. It'd be tempting, wouldn't it?
I don't think so. I mean, part of my role is to be able to get out there and explain what the government's doing with what policy, and I will always take an opportunity to speak if there's something that I can clarify or if I can actually get the message out there even more so. So, yeah, I think it's the best of both worlds. It's helping out media, helping them with their timeframes, giving them the availability if they themselves don't have the time to call me, but also always making myself available where I can.
And do you think you'd ever give maybe a spikier comment in the form of a recording than you did in an actual statement? Or if you do an audio statement, you think it's always going to be pretty much just a reading of what's in the statement, just in another medium, another form?
Well, the whole point for the media is to be able to speak to the PR that we put out. Who knows if I get spicy? It depends on what the topic's going to be. But again, if I do a spicy comment that's a little bit outside of the press release, I need to make sure I'm available to be able to talk further to that comment that I make, and I will ensure that I do so.
Even if none of the big outlets do decide to use it, will you carry on doing it?
Yes, it doesn't take me long to add a couple of 10-second sound bites to the media releases that we put out. And of course, if it is being picked up, then it is useful to some. So we'll continue to do it.
Associate Minister of Justice Nicole McKe talking to me earlier this week. But she and the Foreign Minister aren't the only ones handing out their own soundbites to the media to boost their statements. Associate Minister for Transport James Meagher did it back in June as well, when the government pumped up investment in navigation services for shipping.
Now is the perfect time to look ahead toward building a resilient maritime economy for future generations.
And 1 week later, James Meagher was sending out 3 more soundbites about a funding boost for lifesaving.
Well, I can't claim any credit for this, really. So earlier this year, I hired a new press secretary who has a pretty extensive background in radio broadcasting. And he came to me with the idea that if we include some audio grabs with our press releases, it makes the job of producers and radio reporters so much easier when they're trying to get through a ton of work and create a a new bulletin every 30 minutes, if they've got a wee audio grab there, that might make their job a little bit easier rather than have to try and organise a pre-record or an interviews.
Are you possibly doing this because it might be a way of satisfying a time-pressed media, but actually not having to answer questions and maybe getting out the message that you want?
No, because every time we send these out with the press releases, they always go out with the normal contact information for press secretaries and ministers at the bottom of it. So there's always the option for journalists who want to ring up and ask a little bit more about what we're doing and press on some of the details in those press releases that they can do that. And I'm always happy to take interviews. I think generally the only time I decline would be if it's outside my portfolio or if I literally can't do them.
And do you know, are they being used and which outlets might be using them, or which type of outlets?
I've seen them in a couple of bulletins, yeah, and I won't name names because I don't want to, give anyone's, don't want to give any promotion to a particular station or outlet too. So I think it's been relatively effective. I'm doing a couple this weekend for a couple of announcements we're making in the top of the south. So hopefully they're able to be picked up. And I think for something like the weekend, when people aren't on call as much and staffing levels are lower, that might be a little bit helpful too.
Would you expand this into maybe video comment and things like that? Hopefully you get yourself on the TV news and supply a little bit of that pre-made content that the stretch media might be inclined to use.
I think it's a logical next step. I think my challenge is that I don't think I have the broadcasting ability or the quality to produce video that may be of the standards of the major news outlets. But if that's something that we had the resources to do, and again, that made people's lives easier, then it might be something that we look into. I've got a small yet unqualified background in political comms. I used to work as a press secretary, and I think I wish I'd been smart enough to think of these ideas 6 years ago. Would have made all of our jobs a lot easier, I think.
So could I maybe put this to the test, and every time you release one, I ring up demanding an interview, and if I don't get one every time, I get out you on the radio as not having fulfilled your promise to back it up every time you do it?
I'd be happy for you to do that to me. I would caution about whether or not you have the time to do that for the workload of every minister that picks that up. But no, look, I think if you were ever in receipt of a press release, and even if you still wanted an audio grab for a bulletin or for a story, and you had a different focus than what the minister wanted to put out there, then I think certainly you're within your rights to ring up and see if you can grab a quick 5 minutes. I'm sitting here doing an interviews on the way to the airport, and I'm trying to make myself as available as possible. So hopefully everyone's in that same position too.
So is all this then a step change in politicians trying to furnish the media with their particular message? And if so, does it work on the media and then, by extension, we the people? Dr. Claire Robinson is an expert on political communication, and she's the author of the book Promises, Promises, 80 Years of Wooing New Zealand Voters. A couple of associate ministers attaching now audio soundbites, so their own audio comments to their standard media statements, probably in the hope that they'd run on radio news bulletins. Is it a new thing as far as you know?
Yeah, I think it is. I haven't actually heard it on any news channel that I've listened to. But I also think it's not something to be surprised about again, because it's that whole, how do you utilise digital technology to spread the word? And political parties have always used new technology to try and get their messages across, even going back to Michael Joseph Savage in 1938, when he used film, which was a brand new technology back then, to try and communicate with voters. The interesting thing about James Meagher, of course, is that he is an avid student of political advertising. He set up the electionads.org.nz website back in 2013. So if there's any person that's going to be switched on to various techniques and message techniques, it's going to be James Meagher.
Interesting. But Nicole McKe in that interview said, I'm just trying to help. I know media are stretched and often, they want a grab, they want a soundbite. And she says, not a means of bypassing media scrutiny. So if it is effectively just quotes in the same form as in a written statement, do you think it is no big deal?
I think that the politicians hope that the time-poor media will just insert it into a clip. But there's something deeper going on here, because they're exploiting the whopping decline in journalism employment and most of that decline is because of government-enabled inaction or policies that have seen all that advertising money go offshore, that the advertising money that used to sustain news media organisations. So you've got the government watching the number of journalists that in the old days would have been provided more scrutiny decline, and then political parties who are now exploiting that gap and creating their own media.
Just trying to be helpful, though.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it would be also very helpful if they put a bit more effort into trying to save the news media by stopping that advertising revenue going abroad.
Well, we've also heard, the campaigns now increasingly kind of directly addressing the Prime Minister or even targeting individual ministers like, for example, Simon Watts with, billboards urging him to electrify the country and saying that this will make this an election issue. Open letters to the Prime Minister. They're kind of in public hectoring individual politicians directly.
Lobby groups have always written or taken out whole-page ads in print newspapers. What we're now seeing is they're moving it to digital billboards. And digital billboards can be up longer than a single newspaper ad. They can be cheaper to produce. They can be located at traffic light stops where ministerial cars have to stop for a red light. And so they're right in their face. And actually, from a communications perspective, it's probably a really good way of getting something into the nose of a cabinet minister who may not anymore open the newspaper in the morning and see it.
But they'll be getting lobbied behind the scenes as well by these same groups, right? Federated farmers, in the usual way the public doesn't see. But it's like these groups want to show the public as well that, look, we are leaning on this minister. And I just wonder if you were that individual minister, you'd be almost less inclined to cave into their demands.
The issue that arises with digital media is that it's so accessible, so cheap, that anybody can use it for anything. And if, you want to lobby a minister, say, you've now got not only print, radio, TV, you've got your own channels, your social media, and you also have access to digital billboards, you have to LinkedIn posts. It's a complete industry being able to disseminate your messages as widely as possible on as many digital channels as possible, hoping that one of them is going to get through.
So the politicians are doing this too, as we've heard about in the program. Should the media be, wary of using images selected by political staffers and parties like that and using them as content?
Yes, because by using it, they're essentially using party-generated pictures and feeding the beast and exacerbating the rule-breaking of these political parties. So they're buying into the political parties' campaigns, effectively. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we've got this really weird thing about the New Zealand news media that it loses all perspective when a Prime Minister or Foreign Minister meets an American President or Secretary of State. I mean, I always go back to the 2014 photos of John Key playing golf with Obama, splashed across the newspapers. Absolutely nothing to do with anything, really, other than they were two men of a similar age who liked playing golf. The media lapped them up, and nobody asked who took the photos back then. Absolutely. Anything that is generated through party social media channels really needs to be stopped at the door and asked, why are we repeating this?
Yeah, indeed. So, but I take your point. There is a particular editorial thing that maybe overrides that when it is big-name American politicians or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, Claire, you recently wrote in the Post about what you called attack ads, and you said, look, there's a fair amount of this political communication and advertising that we are paying for, and you say we shouldn't be paying for some of it. What are the rules that you were highlighting that might be getting, if not broken, then certainly bent?
So we've got the Election Act and the Broadcasting Act, which are very clear that political parties can only campaign for votes in the 3 months prior to a general election. That is the only time that taxpayers' funds in the form of what is called the broadcasting allocation can legally be used in the creation of any form of campaign advertising or electioneering.
And does that also need that little annotation or note?
No, that doesn't.
Right.
And the reason for this 3-month period, which is technically called the regulated period, is essentially so that a time-bound campaign period provides a level playing field for all candidates and parties wanting to campaign. The rules are clear that campaigning can only happen in the 3 months prior to an election. So then we've also got the Parliamentary Service Act, and that covers the 2 years and 9 months in between campaigns. Parliamentary parties are allocated funds to allow for them to communicate information intended to bring the parliamentary activities of a member or party to the attention of the public.
Mm-hmm.
And these rules are covered in the Speaker's directions, and the Speaker provides the rules for how parliamentary parties operate. And they very clearly state that funds are not to be used for electioneering. And electioneering is defined as any communication that explicitly seeks or discourages support for the election of a particular person, people, political party or parties. Then there's the Cabinet Manual, which is the Bible for executive government behaviour, and that also states public funds may not be used to finance publicity for party political purposes except for election advertising provided for under the Broadcasting Act 1989, which is the 3-month period. That's where the 3-month period sits. So the rules are really clear. You can only electioneer using public funds in the 3 months prior to an election campaign. The rest of the time, parties are enabled to create information, but they're not allowed to electioneer. With social media, which is so of the moment, so instantaneous, political parties have worked out that they can communicate every day, every hour, and then they've pushed out the boundaries about what is electioneering and what is information, and now they're just pushing it out so that they're being very abusive to people, to each other, and nobody in the Parliamentary Services Commission is policing it. And they're pushing it, in a sense, because of the word explicitly in the parliamentary guidelines, because explicitly, if you follow it to its extension, it really means, does it say in words or verbally, vote for me?
Or don't vote for them.
Or don't vote for them, or those guys are a loser. New Zealand First is really good at this. They just post lots of pictures of Winston Peters smiling.
Yeah, as an example of that, Winston Peters in Malaysia as Foreign Minister, footage of him being warmly greeted by Marco Rubio, US Secretary of State, and New Zealand First put it on Facebook as a kind of promotional video with a sort of TikTok soundtrack of him looking statesman-like. Appropriate or inappropriate?
Well, it's a really good example of the problem, and New Zealand First and ACT have kind of been the parties at the front edge, really pushing out. New Zealand First is using, as a political party, because that's their logo, is using Peter's role and activities he does in his publicly funded government capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs for party political purposes. Because it doesn't say vote for New Zealand First and just has the logo, the boundaries are blurred. But it is really saying our leader is a great leader because he can create amazing relationships with people. And if you want more of this, vote New Zealand First.
You, as well as being an expert on political communication, you are the Chief Executive at the Toi Workforce Development Council. Now, they reviewed journalism qualifications last year. There was a workforce development plan produced, and of course some of the courses are delivered by Polytechs. Now, this week, that's been in the news. They were integrated into Te Pukenga national structure. 10, I think, will go back to being locally established and run. This must have an effect on journalism training?
Well, yes and no. So we've got journalism that's currently folded into 3-year communication degrees offered by universities, AUT Massey and University of Canterbury. And then of the Te Pukenga former institutions, you've got Ara Institute of Canterbury, which provides the Bachelor of Broadcasting with a major in broadcast journalism, and Wintec in Hamilton provides one of our qualifications, a Level 5 Diploma in Journalism, which is integrated into their Bachelor of Communication. But these are really low numbers of people who go into, who want to go into journalism, and the funding system for universities and polytechnics doesn't support courses that have low numbers. But the problem is that all the media outlets and newsrooms say, actually, we don't need people with a 3-year bachelor's degree. They come out and they don't actually know how to operate in a newsroom. What we need is people who are trained in the newsrooms, the variety of newsrooms with all the techniques, working with experts.
Yeah, that's in your workforce development plan. It says
so
industry wants to shift the balance away from class-based learning to more practical experiences to learn journalism skills.
That's right.
Yeah, I guess you want that to be where the journalists are needed as well, so you don't just want it to be in big campuses.
Exactly.
But you'd like that to be presumably around the country. Is there actually a possibility of that if these 10 polytechs around the country are being re-established under local regions other than just a couple of spots?
Yeah, so we've just started talking to Wintec about how we can model a work-based learning approach that enables students to work inside a newsroom. The difficulty is that the really tight tertiary funding system isn't flexible enough to be able to enable this to happen easily or quickly. All the financial incentives are for long-form degrees and not for short-form industry learning. So we've just got to keep hammering and trying to work out different models and ways of funding this. Unfortunately, Toi Mai has been disestablished by the government in the vocational education reform, so we've only got 4.5 months effectively to try and get this done. Hopefully a new industry skills board will pick it up, but I can't guarantee that.
Yeah, I did note your recent piece in the Post that we talked about earlier did say, Claire is the outgoing Tumo Toi, or Chief Executive of Toi Mai. Yes.
That's right. That's right. Those days are over, and I'll probably return to political commentating come January the 1st.
There's opportunities there, I'm sure. In that workforce development plan, there was this interesting passage here after consulting with both educators and I guess the media industry. It says, further, people we spoke to, this is quoting from the report, also noted a rise in opinion and activism in new journalists, which was attributed to being a byproduct of social media influence, changing viewpoints, particularly on social issues, and the rise of opinionification of news content on social media platforms. That's the sort of thing I imagine, critics of journalism, particularly young journalists, would say, aha, that's what I've been complaining about. And this is a persistent issue now that's being brought up by the media's critics. Do you think that is a real problem?
Well, we were told it was. So it was inevitable in the sense that all of a sudden digital media came out and journalists could start expressing opinions. It was felt, I think, by news editors that it personalised the journalists. They were intelligent people. They did have their own views.
Even if your feed says, not the views of my employer, this is a personal feed.
Yeah, but in the research we heard from a prominent editor who said he wished he hadn't allowed it to happen because it's all of a sudden, it blurred the boundaries between what was information, fact, meant to be objective coverage, and a reporter having an opinion. And that then fed a lot of distrust in the news media. So the next generation will probably go back to being a lot more objective in their coverage. But at the same time, you've got oodles of other news channels now competing of people who are not trained in journalism, who are expressing opinions, who have got great followers, and advertisers are flocking to them.
That was Dr. Claire Robinson, an expert on political communication now and in the past. She's the author of the book Promises, 80 Years of Wooing New Zealand Voters. And as you heard there, she's also the outgoing Tumo o Toi, or Chief Executive, of the Toi Mai Workplace Development Council. After a bit of a break last week, Christopher Luxon was back to business as usual this week as Prime Minister and in Parliament and, inevitably, in the headlines. And as the Herald's Audrey Young noted, he chose to put the boot in to his favourite punching bag, a mixed metaphor manoeuvre there that would require some impressive MMA-style high kicking, the likes of which we haven't actually seen yet from Mr Luxon. But the Prime Minister certainly did criticise the Wellington City Council for its spending on nice-to-haves like lavishly lit lavatories, the Tākina Convention Centre, again, and again he criticised that bike lane up Molesworth Street that's in plain sight from the top of the Beehive. And he also condemned Councillor Ray Chung's now notorious 2-year-old email about Wellington's Mayor Tory Whanau as pretty vile and unacceptable. And he wasn't alone in that. Last Wednesday, the Post had a roll call of MPs and office holders, all saying similar things, and they also reported Ray Chung himself as saying he now regrets sending that email in the first place. But that didn't stop him talking about it again, at length, on the platform this week, and even repeating the details of what he admitted was basically third-hand gossip.
Ray, that's one part of the story that doesn't stand up, as it were. Excuse the pun.
Yeah. Yep. But I don't know. I was just repeating everything that I said.
Okay. And Ray,
On Midweek Media Watch last Wednesday, Hayden Donnell took a look at how that played out in the media, as well as an incomplete story about a startup business that was pulled by stuff, a surprise in RNZ's annual Statement of Performance Expectations, and former TV journalist Orini Kaipara entering politics in the upcoming Tāmaki Makaurau by-election. If you missed all that, Midweek Media Watch is available for free on the Mediawatch podcast page at rnz.co.nz, or you'll find it in our feed on any major podcast platform. That's it for this weekend. Thanks for listening. If you have any thoughts for us or ideas for us to follow up, do get in touch. Email us mediawatch@rnz.co.nz, or you'll also find us at MediawatchNZ on X. And you can even write us an old-fashioned letter and send it to Mediawatch, PO Box 123 Wellington. I'll be back next Wednesday with Midweek Media Watch. Catch you then. In the meantime, follow Media Watch and listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any podcast app to make sure you never miss an episode.